Okay, so hi everyone.
Hi.
Super excited to be here.
Yes.
So the session is called Digital Citizenship, Activism, and Social Media. And my name is Matsuko, but you can call me Matt. So I'm French Canadian. So I know that I've spoken French with a couple of you guys already. So you can decide, should I do this in français or in English?
English.
Half and half.
Okay. And I know that there's probably like 20 languages that are spoken,
At least.
So I'm not going to brag about the fact that I know two. It's like whatever. So I'm actually an EDD student. So EDD is it's kind of a doctoral program, but given by the college, it's more professional. So EDD in educational leadership. I'm actually down to basically my thesis, my capstone project at this point, and I'm also an MBA. And I'm basically an educational technologist, and I'm the LMS project leader. So LMS, Learning Management System. So I manage the course management system for the University of Delaware. But I'm also, basically I help faculty members use technologies. That's my day job. But I'm also very interested in social media and new applications, web component tools, and those kind of things. So that's kind of why I'm here today. I'm also an instructor in there's a social media strategy program that we offer with professional continuing studies, so adult learners, and I'm one of the co-instructors for this. You can find me online. Mostly I'm active on Google+, and I don't know if how many of you are actually on Google+, but I think that it's a really great platform, at Matt Lord on Twitter, and I do blog, not super frequently, but once in a while. So as I said earlier, all the materials for this session are on that short URL, bit.ly/UDFLCDC. I said DC for digital citizenship. So that's the short URL for all the materials for this session. And actually, we are going to be using technology later. So I know that most of you have your computers or tablets or whatever open. We are going to be using a collaborative Google Doc and that kind of stuff, so please do use your technology as we're going through this session. And so, of course, Twitter hashtag, you guys already know that. So actually, I forgot to give you these little cards, and I'm going to do that right now. I want to ask you guys, I want to get a sense of the kind of social media accounts you have. Those are my clickers, by the way. Those old school clickers. I hope nobody's colorblind, because I'll do so well. Sorry. More? No? Are you good? No?
We're looking for a place to send you.
I'm almost done.
We're looking for a place to send you.
Okay, let's do this. So do you have a Vine account? Yes or no? Green for yes, red for no.
Fine. You are fine.
Okay, so if you don't know what it is, you don't have an account, obviously. Okay. So a couple of you see one or two in there. Okay, cool. What about Facebook?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Everybody's got a Facebook?
Yes.
Yeah, that's classic. You see that here in the U.S. as well. Everybody and their mother has a
Except less and less so, and less so because their mothers have it.
But they still have it, but they just put their best foot forward on Facebook, and then
No, they
do all
don't
the
even,
crazy stuff on other platforms. What about Twitter? I guess most of you have Twitter. There's just always one. Okay. Snapchat.
Very popular with teenagers.
Exactly. So that's the platform. That's basically the system that auto-destructs all the messages after 10 seconds. Instagram.
Also popular with teenagers.
Yeah. Instagram, so photo apps. Okay, we're seeing about, I would say, a third of the classroom. LinkedIn, about, I would say, 2/3 maybe. Okay. Google Plus, about half of the class or something. If you have a Gmail account, you're one click away from it.
I have Gmail.
What about Pinterest?
Yeah, you see, you on everything.
That's usually a girl thing.
Girlfriend,
That's usually a girl thing.
yes.
What's a girl thing? I don't know what that means.
Pinterest is like 97% women.
Yes, that's why you are here.
That's why you're there.
That's why you are here, because there's most of girls.
There's a lot of. I'm there too, so whatever. So basically, it's just just by looking around, you can see that there's a certain amount of penetration of some of these technologies in your basically your everyday practices. So I wanted to get a sense to see if it was pretty different from what I was seeing from college students here in the U.S. And it seems like Twitter has definitely been growing in the last couple of years. It's kind of weird because a lot of people are paying attention to Twitter, but not necessarily tweeting themselves. So they create an account just to follow other people, and they're not super active with it. But it seems like that trend is kind of changing now. So let me just start by talking about. Anyone recognizes this map here?
Yes.
Which part?
The country itself, I think it's pretty obvious.
Yes.
What about these red lines?
Which?
That's routes, yeah, that's actually the interstate system that was developed in the U.S. In the 90s. Basically it was started in 1950s or something. And President Eisenhower back then basically said, our unity as a nation is sustained by free communication of thoughts and by easy transportation of people and goods. So basically that the information, the highway, the interstate system that was created in the U.S. brought everybody together, closer together. Like for instance, back in the day, it would take you 60 days to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, because it was just, rural roads and stuff like that. Yep.
No, I just want to say, so I-95, which you've driven on a few times to get to Philadelphia and so on and so forth.
Yep.
That's the one that goes from north to south. It goes from Maine, all the way down here. So
Down to Miami.
Yep. So that's the one that runs right through Delaware. Sorry.
So basically, the interstate system was one of the driving force behind the U.S. economy. That's what made us what we are as a country today. So what I'm seeing is that basically the internet is doing the same thing worldwide. The internet is basically a channel for free communication of thoughts. And so that's where I want to start the conversation with you guys. So just a couple of little slides about the state of the web and what it looks like at this point. So America the Connected, 87% of adults in the U.S. use the internet. So so we're talking about maybe 180 million, 200 million people using the internet in the U.S. So that's definitely we're pretty much at saturation when it comes to internet usage in the U.S. But of course, it's not. We're seeing some trends in other countries, including the African countries. Like for instance, we're getting to 3 billion internet users worldwide. 3 billion out of 7-8 billion or something people. So we're getting almost at the halfway point where 1 human in 2 is actually connected to the internet. So that's kind of a tipping point. We weren't anywhere close to this at the beginning of the 2000s or the 90s or whatever. So that's kind of a game changer. And also the other thing that has changed on the web is that this used to be a web page. A web page used to be basically an author, somebody, usually it's a big corporation or whatever, they had control of the information, would create a web page and push it to an audience. And that was the way that, you know, the internet was built at the beginning. There was just a few people that actually had control of the information, and everybody was just consumers of information. Well, nowadays, example of a wiki where everybody's an author and an audience at the same time. So now we're getting to a point where the internet is basically something that can be edited by. The same people who consume the information can be the people who actually create the information, which is another kind of change in basically the control of the information. It used to be very easy for corporations and nations to actually impose a certain type of information and push it to the masses. Nowadays, it's not as easy as it was. So, and it's also mobile first, because, like, for instance, that headline, 90% of photographers have never used a camera, because they all use their cell phones. So, you know, it's kind of, it changes certain disciplines, it changes the way that we have to look at the world, and mobile is definitely making a big dent in internet access, because, you know, if you have the choice between buying a $1,000 computer versus buying like a, you know, $50 smartphone, then most people can afford a smartphone. Most people cannot afford a computer. But this basically becomes good enough and becomes the way that people actually interact with the world. So in terms of devices, by 2015, we're talking 4.5 billion mobile devices that are in use in the world. But then we're talking 3 billion people connected. So it means that a lot of people have multiple mobile devices. So I'm going to add a tablet and a smartphone, and then I'm going to add another one just in case I break one or whatever. And other people won't have one. So there's still, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to have one. It just means that people have multiple ones. So basically, I still see that as there is still a chasm. There is a difference in how much people can get access to the web and how much their voices can be heard on the internet. So basically, this is, you don't have to look at that infographic. What I want to say about this is that this is an infographic that came with a report from IBM about, they were talking about Generation C. So in the US, what they're seeing is that there's a certain class of people that are hyper-connected. You know, they know how to use digital technologies. They are really good at it. They own, you know, multiple devices. They have access to high-speed internet. And they're really smart about using technology. But then you get the other part, which is basically a lot of people don't have access to the internet, don't have mobile devices and whatever. So instead of being a generational divide like we used to have, that was mostly like we were talking about millennials and baby boomers, and something divided by age. Now we're seeing basically the divide showing up in digital literacy. So basically digitally literate people have their voices heard more and more, and it's amplified, and people who are disenfranchised, their voices get lost in the global conversation. So I think that the first thing I want to tackle before we start looking at, you know, a larger picture is I want to talk about new literacies and what does it mean to be digitally literate, and how can we get started in being mindful about your use of digital technologies. So I'm going to base this section on a book called NetSmart from Howard Rangel. That was a book published in 2012, and you'll find there's links to a lot of stuff. If you search for Howard Rangel's name online, you'll find a lot of resources, a lot of articles, lots of stuff with his name on it. Really interesting guy. He's like in his late 70s or something, and he's kind of, they call him a digital elder. It's like he's been through the whole thing. He started, you know, playing with networks and computers in the early 80s and all that stuff. And it's got a fascinating story to tell. So the first point that he makes in his book is called attention literacy. So attention is a skill that must be learned, shaped, practiced. This skill must evolve as we are to evolve. So a lot of people get distracted by digital technologies. You know, you start doing something on your computer, all of a sudden, you know, something pings, whatever, you start looking on Facebook, and basically, a lot of people are just scattered. They scatter their, you know, their attention towards a lot of different networks, and they just, you know, switch from one task to the next all the time. And that's not super efficient. So one of the first things that I recommend is to start basically being mindful, just taking a step back and looking at your use of technology. And are you being as productive as you can using those technologies, or are you just, you know, embedding like little routines that are just taking up too much of your time? And so that, especially like we say that to college students as well, because a lot of them are going to end up just playing games instead of studying. But I think that it applies to everyone who's actually, you know, in the workforce. How can you, you know, make the most of your time? Well, it's by being mindful and being aware of that your mind is just, you know, fleeing away from you. The second part is, he calls it crap detection. So I know that we had that conversation, Pasi, when we were at that reception. I think that it might be the case for a lot of you guys. Rumors, it starts spreading, you know, and it's really hard to actually get rid of those. And once they're out of the box and people have started spreading false news, it's really hard to keep that in check. Do we have the audio now? We'll find out. Okay. And we just bring that video from Lydia. I think that she's actually a professor there. No? Good.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lydia Reese from the University of Delaware, assistant professor in communication. One of the most important parts of journalism is to know who your sources are. That's just as important as an information consumer. We call it media literacy. Knowing where your information comes from, just as important as knowing where your food comes from, where your water comes from. So how do you figure out where your information comes from and if it's valid? One of the first things you can do is check the domain on the website, check the URL. Is it from a .edu site, meaning it's an educational website? Probably better chance of it being, like, believing the truth of it if it comes from professors or from scholars. Is it the .org? Is it from an organization that specializes in the kind of information that you're seeking? It may have better information than the .com site, which is a commercial site. Not that commercial sites are bad or you shouldn't believe them, but you have to understand that it's coming from the point of view perhaps of a business and of someone who cares about selling something. Another thing you want to check is the credibility of the webpage creator themselves. Check the About Us page. Who has sponsored the webpage? Who is sponsoring the information? Who has a stake in you believing or not believing what the information is about? And finally, it's knowing who owns the site. Not just who created it, but who owns it. Is there a reason that a site says it's good to drink beer? Maybe it's owned by Anheuser-Busch. Maybe you should believe it, maybe you shouldn't. But you need to know where the information comes from. So when you consume the information, you know whether it's true or not.
Okay, good. So any stories of, I know that I've heard a couple of stories about, you know, false news spreading. Anyone wants to, you know, shout out one of the stories that they've had in their countries or stuff that has really been, you know, obviously wrong, that have just spread like wildfire?
We actually had it in 2011, the first time that Nelson Mandela was hospitalized. Well, obviously not the first time, but in his 90s. It was posted online that he was dead. And some of the international media houses actually ran with it. But obviously it wasn't true.
That's always a challenge. It just takes one, right? Okay, so I have a little task for you, a little activity. So that's something I want you to do right now. Are you Googleable? So when you Google your name, first of all, if somebody Googled your name, would they find you? Okay, so some is no, some is yes. But you can Google it right now. If you have your computer, it might have changed.
You mean since the last time you looked, it might have changed, or what?
Huh?
What do you mean it might have changed since the last time?
Google
you
is
looked?
dynamic. You never know it. You know
What might come up?
what might come up. Something might have come up afterwards. So you let me know when you Googled yourself and if you find yourself or not. Okay? So you agree? Okay? Most of you agree? Shape doesn't exist?
I mean, there are those people who have like this. So.
Yeah, it's a very common name.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's always a problem. Okay, cool. So the next question I have then, so are you trustable? If someone found your social media profile, would they consider you a trusted source? Yes or no? Okay, yes. Okay. So, okay, you're not sure? What makes you not sure?
Well, because in creating a more social platform, I don't use my full name. So depending on who Googles me, they would find either or. Because I use Joy more formally, but then I use Joyce.
Okay. So that's always an issue because that comes down to branding. How do you brand yourself online? What name do you use online? And sometimes if somebody's already sitting on your name, so basically you have somebody who's just, he's taking ownership of that name. And how do you fight that? If somebody's already taken your brand. It's kind of like the same problem with businesses. If you have a business name and if somebody has already incorporated it, already has a .com with it, it's like how are you going to fight that? So so that's one part of the equation. So finding a name that's going to be that when you know that when somebody's going to Google that name, they're going to find you. So it might be that you use like your middle name, or you use a certain keyword maybe in your website. So if you're in a nonprofit or whatever NGO, maybe you associate your name with a keyword so that when people search for the name with an additional keyword, then they find your profile instead of a soccer player or whatever. So that's always something something to be mindful about as you're moving forward, establishing a good digital footprint, basically. And that comes to the third part, which is participation. So in the future, your digital footprint will carry far more weight than anything you might include on a resume. So people are going to look at your resume, but the first thing they're going to do afterwards, they're going to take your name, they're going to Google it. Or they're going to check on Facebook, they're going to check on Twitter. Who are you? What do you do? What kind of presence do you have online? If you have no presence, it looks as bad as if you have a presence that has some stuff that's not quite professional. It's like if you have no presence, like who is that guy? So basically, you're able to live your life without having a trace on the internet. It doesn't make any sense. So I think that it's up to you to kind of take control of that in some way. And one of the ways to actually do it is to do something like this. I think a lot of you already probably do something similar. I've made this little diagram that says if information was made live, so let's say you have an external information source like an article or something, and then that information you receive, and you decide what you do with it. You want to store it so that you can retrieve it later. You want to use your mirror and forward it to other people. Just pass it on to other people. Or do you create your own information and share it with other people? And every time you do that, you kind of add some information to it. That's why there's those plus signs, because the fact that you stored it, the fact that you forwarded it to other people, that it comes from you, is basically additional information, because some people might trust you, so therefore when you receive information from you, they associate it with certain keywords, certain practices. And this basically is curation online. And this is kind of like the way that the internet likes to work. Because the internet likes people to just take a digital mess of anyone creating anything, and then having people sift through it and deciding what's worth sharing or not. So the whole process of curation is actually a good way for you to establish a good digital footprint. Because if you're sharing stuff that's related to your country, related to your practices, your practice as a professional, then all of a sudden you're building that kind of those keywords around your name, around your brand. So the next step that Reingold talks about is collaboration. So now that you're basically moving from a self-centered view to a how do I work with other people using digital technologies? And one of the big examples of collaboration, of course, is Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is a free encyclopedia that just competed with Britannica that has been around for like 200 years or whatever. And they basically, now they don't even print Britannica anymore. They have a digital version of it, but they don't even print it anymore. So talk about disruption by just a bunch of volunteers, anyone on the internet can edit a Wikipedia page. You can go on right now, Wikipedia, log in, make a change, save it, and you're done. That change is now a part of Wikipedia. So that's kind of interesting. And thinking that Wikipedia is actually pretty accurate, despite the fact that anyone can edit it, it's just, pretty interesting as well. I think one of the reasons why Wikipedia is so successful is that for every one person who's kind of, who wants to sabotage Wikipedia, there's 10 people who are actually watchdogs who want it to be, accurate. So as long as you have more people interested in doing good than people interested in doing bad, then you can afford to have a very open system, because you know that the community is going to be the watchdog of your actual digital resources. Another thing I want to talk about that's actually very close to my heart is open educational resources. So how many of you know about open educational resources, red or green? Okay, about half of you, I guess. Okay, so open educational resources are actually educational resources that are freely available online. And not only freely available as in you can access them through the internet, but open as in you can download them, remix them, change them, do whatever you want with them. So open in a sense of libre, and not in a sense of libre and gratis in some way. It's both. So a lot of these sites here that are listed, and there's actually a link on the blog post that I created that goes to a list of all these resources, so you can just explore on your own. But if basically, like if you look at a site like Sailor.org, their foundation has actually recreated the whole university college curriculum with open textbooks. So you can say, usually when somebody takes a mechanical engineer degree, this is the kind of learning materials they get access to. And you can get access to that online for free right now if you go to Sailor.org. They're working on the K-12 curriculum right now to basically make sure that all of those materials are made available for free online for anyone to use. You guys also have access to the the African Virtual University, and they have a big OER initiative at the African Virtual University, where they create open educational resources. So it's open educational resources created by African people, for African people within the context of their own countries. So that's something that, if you want to educate people and you need something real quick, you can just find these things right away and they're just free. Yeah.
I've never heard of this.
Never heard of this? we'll hook you up. Okay? So the last part of his book is actually called Network Smart. And that section is mostly related to how do you make valid connection with other people online? How do you take advantage, how do you leverage making connections with people online? This is a diagram from Alec Kouros. He's actually a professor at the University of Regina in Canada. And he's created that diagram a couple of years ago already, 2006, calls it the network teacher. But the whole idea really is that on a day-to-day basis in the digital economy, you interact with content, you interact with people. And all of these things basically should leverage one another in your professional development. All of these things should basically allow you to stay on top of your discipline. So creating what they call a personal learning network, connecting with relevant other people, so that it's not always about connecting with friends. So instead of hanging out with other people, you're actually geeking out. You're seeking people who have the same interest as you, and you're trying to make relevant connections so that you can develop yourself as a professional in an open web environment. So as you develop your personal learning network, eventually you create those kind of crazy diagrams of just what are the processes that you run through every day in order to be able to keep up with what's happening in your industry, and who do you share that information with? What kind of conversations are you having on different networks? And how can you set up notification processes so that you can keep up with what's happening when somebody's actually trying to contact you? So this is basically 6 years in the making. Okay, don't be freaked out by it. This is something this is my personal sharing loop type of personal learning network. This is what I do with my technology. But this is something that's just been iteratively being built over 6 or 7 years. At the beginning, you're kind of following a couple of mailing lists, or you follow a couple of experts or whatever. Eventually, you develop that fluency with technology that allows you to be more efficient with it. Yeah.
I find it very interesting, and I want to understand the link between the color news and the respective new media.
Oh, the colors?
Yeah.
Well, the green arrows are incoming information, and the red arrows are outgoing. So basically, the curation process happens around me. I'm a lot slimmer on that picture. And that's kind of the idea. The idea is that there's incoming information, there's outgoing information, and which channels I follow versus which channels I broadcast to is kind of what's represented with that diagram. So next step is called, I call it that section, sticky ideas, creating compelling stories online. So I believe that a lot of you actually have a journalism background. So there shouldn't be a lot of new stuff here, but we're going to try to have fun with it. So first story I want to bring up is Coney 2012. I know that a lot of you probably have, you're probably sick of hearing about it, but just the fact that somebody just created a 30-minute video on YouTube. First of all, 30-minute. Who does 30-minute videos anymore? No one. And from that video, well, there's actually results that came out of that campaign. There might have been some issues. I know that Paul was saying that there might have been some issues with the funding, whatever. But overall, they except for catching the guy, they've gotten a good impact. So basically, digital technologies and stories online have an impact if they're done correctly, and if they really touch the right people at the right time. So one of the checklists that I usually use for making sure that my stories are up to snuff, it's from a book that's called Make This Stick, from two brothers, the Heath brothers. And they basically created that little scorecard that says, you know, if you're going to create a story online to try to, you know, get people to adhere to your cause or whatever, then it should be simple. It should be something that, you know, they won't, you know, that's in simple language that your audience can understand, that is not like multiple messages in the same artifact. That's unexpected. That's got a twist to it. That's got, you know, something different than all the other stuff it is. That's concrete, that people can actually, you know, kind of, that's a tangible kind of thing that they can relate to on a day-to-day basis. That is credible. So I saw a tweet, not a tweet, but a message on Facebook about credibility. I think that Middlebrook actually talked about credibility this morning, right? So your message should be credible. It should come from a credible source. It should be emotional. So one of the things about emotions is that as human beings, we learn so much more when there's emotions involved. That's kind of the way that our brain is wired. Is basically if you see something, if you feel a deep emotion, you learn better, because that kind of creates an anchor for you to associate that knowledge with the emotional experience. So if you can include some emotional parts of what you're doing, it could be, you know, fun or, you know, sadness or whatever, but something that basically evokes an emotional reaction from your audience, you're going to have a better outcome. And if it's a story, because we're all used to just telling stories to one another. And so if it's a story, if you can put real names to it, if you can just, you know, let people just tell their own story, those are the kind of things that can make your story stick a little better when you're creating something for an online audience. Another thing is that you've got new medium, therefore you got new styles that are emerging. Like the lolcats. You know, who would have thought that just taking a picture of a cat and putting captions on top of it would become such a phenomenon? You know? So the cat, the lolcat, is kind of an example of just, you know, that crazy crowdsource, you know, just people on the internet just having fun, and all of a sudden it becomes a way that it's a style of communications now. You know, you can use that same kind of image quote in some way, in a lot of different other ways. The Keep Calm poster, you know, again, the whole idea of memes, you know, all those, that's just something that that's so everybody can associate with. Once they see it a couple of times, they're like, what is that? Okay, I understand now. I understand the way that these things are built, and I understand the kind of messages that they actually promote. So I just did one for the hashtag, for this class. And then you get, you know, activism group or whatever, like this Forward.us, that's about immigration reform, so Selfies for Reform. So these guys are basically advocating for immigration reform in the US, and they came up with that campaign where you take a picture of yourself, you put a little note, it sends a postcard to your representative saying that you're basically for immigration reform and you want them to actually do something about it in Congress. So basically using those modes of communication, those new styles, in order to get people to be more involved with politics. So now we're gonna I'm gonna stop talking for a while. And what I want you to do is, since you all have digital, you know, devices, let's try to do a little digital storytelling activity. There's actually an example that I have from Google Plus right here on screen that you can use, but I would much prefer if you guys actually use some of the materials you already have. So the idea really is to create an image quote, like similar to like a lolcat or whatever. Use some of the images you have about your projects, and use like a, you know, maximum of 2 sentences. I would say if you keep it short, like 12 words, that's probably better. But and then once you're done with this, you're going to just share that to the group so that you can just look at them and try to see if you were able to pick on the checklist that we had from the maybe stick example. So there's also a Google Doc that we use for this this session, and there's a couple of links that Paul, if you're using a mobile device like an iOS device or something like that, there's actually applications, little apps that you can download and play with. So let's just bring up the Google Doc real quick. So it's actually available from this this blog post. There it is, Google Doc back channel. So the short URL for this post is this one here, bit.ly. Can you write it down on the side? Yep. So bit.ly/UDWFLDC, and then you'll see just under the slides, there's a link that says Google Doc back channel, and then you can get to this back channel that you can use for this presentation. So in the tools and techniques section, there's already a couple of links that point to a couple of meme generators. Everybody still following? Nope. Okay. Yep. So this is the short URL for this page here. Let me just zoom in a little bit more. This one here. And once you get to the blog post, then you'll see just under the slides there's a link that says Google Doc back channel. If you go there, you'll see tools and techniques, and you'll be able to access some of the different technologies that you could use. If you want to use something you already have on your machine, like if you have Photoshop already or if you have other stuff, it's up to you. But really the idea is that I would prefer for you to actually use stuff that you already have for your different organization that you work for. And if you don't have anything, then you can ask your colleague or whatever, you can work collaboratively. I will take probably around 20 minutes to work on this, so we'll just walk around and help you guys.
Music.
But do you want to bring up the example? We have the link to the example at the story. Is it India?
Oh yeah. So this one is is just an example. So if you have no materials to work on, basically this is just a Google Plus post about UNICEF India, and somebody has just done a photo, a little photo album about a certain community and telling a story about it. So what I was thinking is that if you wanted to use this, it's actually linked from the post. Hold on, or did I forgot to put it on? That's just sucky. I'm actually going to have to change my post and give you guys access. But the idea really is that I found this story on Google Plus, and it's kind of a pretty long to read. There's about 6 or 7 paragraphs and 9 photos. So I thought that would be a good test bed if you wanted to have something that, okay, let's start from these pictures and this story and try to boil it down to one tagline in one picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just edit the post real quick to make sure that you actually have access to that link.
But it would be great if you did your own story or
if you did something that you can reuse later, that would be better.
No, he's saying you could start with something that's long, and then your So if you don't have your own organization or your own store, you can use that one and do the exercise.
Yes.
Okay. But the end product is supposed to be
Just an image with a tagline on top of it.
an image with a couple sentences.
Yep.
Or 12 words. From your.
Yeah, I'm lost too.
The story that I have.
Everybody's lost, I think.
Okay. Oh, the Google Doc? Did you get to the Google Doc?
Yep.
So you don't know what to do.
Okay, yeah.
It's a little bit varied because I put the slides afterwards.
I think we lost a bunch of people now. Okay. So you can make a new one from here. So it's available to
Okay. Okay. So I think that some people are not sure what a meme is.
Yes.
So a meme is basically, you know, like the lolcats where you have an image with text on top of it. So a meme is basically whatever, something that's a common style of images that you would find online, basically. So the idea really is that my challenge to you is I'm gonna use like this board here, is for you to create just one image, and a lot of these things are gonna allow you to do that. So one image with some text on top of the image, with just a tagline with an image, something that basically, if you had to share on social media, like on Facebook or on Twitter, if you had to share one image with one message, you have to have 5 seconds of somebody's attention. What would be the message you would send those people?
And the image is the picture.
Yeah, a picture.
So a picture from a website or a picture of your own.
A picture you took of you know, somebody who's who's in pain or in trouble, or somebody who's got a great story of resilience or whatever, something that will inspire other people.
So you find the image, you find the picture, and then you attach.
Oh. Okay, so now you're browsing the
sentence or
pictures.
two or some words that
You're on the
convey
way.
the meaning that you want to convey from your organization or from your work. And wait, what's a meme again? A meme is like all those cat pictures are
A meme is an online phenomenon. Something that a lot of people can just really. People use SpongeBob and we use pictures from the most interesting men in the world. Just change the captions. The Grumpy Cat is another one. Star Wars Kid.
So it's words and then the images change for each one?
Yeah. No, it's the opposite. Usually the image
It's the same.
has a certain meaning to it, and then people put. But in your case, you want to have a picture of your own. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know.
We lost.
Huh?
We lost.
All right, I don't know. Oh, you know.
Yeah, let me just okay. So here's an example of a meme. That's one example. So the picture can stay the same. The words can change as people think of different stories they want to tell or different directions they want to take.
But in your case, you want to use your own picture
Yes.
and use a tagline of your own.
How will you use?
Huh?
Once they have the picture, we're in
Yes.
There's that's why there's applications that you can use. So even the if you go back to the Google Doc, there's a link in Tools and Techniques. So at the bottom here, if you click on Tools and Technique and go to that link,
Over there.
you see there's Meme Crunch is one of the ones that you can actually use.
Have to go to the Google Doc.
So you can do it online. There's actually an online generator.
I got it. Yes.
then-
Google Doc something.
So let's say that I'm on that website that's called Meme Crunch.
No, they're all getting their own.
No, I know, but you can actually use Meme Crunch to create it because you can use a custom image.
So should we download those
actually,
You can, if you have a computer, you can do it directly on your computer. You don't have to use a mobile app.
Go here. Go here. Go here.
Yeah,
Okay. Then go back. Back. Okay. Go here. So choose a technique.
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
So you good? Now it's being able to.
Oh, if you want to do it in Word or whatever, that's fine. Yeah. You can definitely work in any software you have on your machine. If you want to use Word or if you want to use PowerPoint, it's up to you.
I'm being able to click on. Choose a technique. It's being.
Okay.
And then click on the okay, there you go. And go to Main Crunch to actually go to the one that's a web-based application.
Hey.
So you see, you can create. There's a tab that says use custom image, so you can upload your own image and pick your own text to it.
Yeah, Mean Crunch is the one you should use if you're using your computer.
You can.
Oh, it's online already, so you should probably download it first, and then so sorry, there might be a way for that thing. Yeah, you should probably download it first.
Well, I think that the idea really is to try to come up with something that will make people reflect. You know, that's kind of, even if it could be funny. You know, if it's funny, it's probably better. But I think that the idea is to do something that if you had to share something about your organization on social media, you would create something like that. So, and if you feel that you see there's a use custom image, an image of your own, then you can upload it and just create your text.
No,
Yes.
write something.
I'm gonna
Yes.
Something you've done.
No, they generally are.
You can also use like and then just save it.
So what happens once you submit?
Yeah, it's going to be online.
We don't do it.
Next,
At this point, if
next.
you're not interested in having it online, you can do it later.
And how
Title of your picture.
If you're not, you know, confident because you might not have information or whatever.
If anyone's finished, and they have all this. Are you done?
Yes, he's done.
Okay, then
And
go
he's
help somebody
posting
else.
to
So you put yours on Facebook?
Yes, he's sharing it on Facebook.
You both put yours on Facebook?
I'm doing mine.
What?
I'm doing mine. I helped him done, now I'm doing mine.
Oh, okay.
say something about it.
Yes.
I mean, it's don't make it a big
So if you will teach someone, you will get it.
I will sorry.
No. This is a super good feature.
I can't remember how to do it. So I don't know if you put
Oh, okay. You have too much stuff on it?
Yeah.
You can take it to Smith Hall, you know, sort of downstairs, maybe they'll help you. Were you with us that day? We went there? With Basho one day, we went there. Were you there? Down in the basement? Yeah.
You think about it. So how did you flip that? How did you use part, okay?
You see here, now you got the text. The text that goes with it. So that's it. So, you'll see what you get. You'll see what it looks like. It's very creative.
So nice. I already through the file. I read through the title, but it's when I click on submit, it says.
I think the image is too big. I saw the same thing here. So do you have a smaller image, an image that's not as big in terms of maybe not like 13 megapixels or whatever, something that that's smaller. Maybe you can just resize it so that it's a little bit smaller. Because you can edit once if you're in an image, you can create a copy and then size it down a little bit so that it's not as big. Doesn't have as many pixels.
Oh my gosh!
Break the internet? Yes. Have you done yours already? Okay. We already have
Yeah, you should.
yes. So go back to Yes. Yes.
Terrible. I don't know why they look so upset. There's all the bullshit.
It's actually so in the because it seems like I see a couple of people just because of that. It seems like online what's there for something that's small. So I think it's so
It's for the love song.
Still writing, man?
So if you modify the image, you can just size it down.
Is it uploaded? And then you just you just did that now? You just created that now? Okay. Good.
Yeah. That's not what's
Still posting.
Oh,
once the image is created.
People put this on Facebook.
Once the image is created, you can go to the Google Doc and actually paste the URL of your image. There's actually a section that's called links to artifact creating during the session at the very top, and you can just paste the URL right here in the document so that we have access to what you created.
Can we put it on the Facebook group?
Oh, you can share it on Facebook or Twitter, or whatever you want, whatever you feel comfortable with. Oh, when you click on it once, you see it opens up as a heading. Click there and it's going to go down. It's like an anchor in that Google document. Yeah, just paste it in. Perfect. Well done. There you go.
Oh, God, my favorite.
Right. That'd be good.
Yes. Did you get it? Stuff too big on. You might have to. Yeah.
That's really funny. That's really.
It's just make it smaller.
I like it. The holding one.
Yeah,
And just make it even smaller. It seems like it's make it another most of the time. Now it's you've already saved it as 50% of the original. So make it, just make it even smaller. Eventually we'll get there.
Oh my God, you see.
Come.
Is there any suspicion of more on this side?
It seems like Meme Crunch is kind of picky about the size of the picture. You might have to just resize it down like 50%, 70%, 75%, because most people have pictures that are like super big, and these things are kind of generating stuff on the fly, so that's usually kind of picky.
Nice one, quick.
So once you're done, once you've created your image and it's shared online, it should have a unique URL. So just put it down on that Google Doc, just paste it in, just like Joyce. Be like Joyce.
Yeah.
Or post it on Facebook. I can bring up the video.
Shape. It's completely what?
It's like blocks.
Oh, okay. Tony Valentine came 2 times to our sessions. I understood that IGS was supposed to be backstopping us with their IT person.
Oh, and Jeremy?
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I could ask Tony to come over again, or I could send Shape to Tony.
And if that doesn't work, then I can call Jeremy. He's completely blocked.
Okay.
He's saying like you can't get on their website because of violence, downloaded Google Music, whatever. They have all those options. But
I don't know how the choice.
I mean, do you think someone should come right now to take care of it?
no, I think he can take care of tomorrow, but I know he's trying to use the thing that's still
We
the
could
connection is not good either. I don't know. Probably, I'm sorry if I interrupted.
No, he didn't tell me that. He didn't tell me that. But I mean, that's just sort of that's been a question all along. And
is this like a Dan question?
What?
Is this a Dan question?
Dan Bottom.
Is he supposed to organize all this?
It's not a quick fix. It's not like just changing a set of.
You're talking about Shape?
Yeah, I move virus.
Yes. Yeah.
Just needs some base that. If we were here on campus, we would call 6,000.
Right.
So I got a computer that's got this message and something. You guys would have to take that call and get some information.
Yeah.
Or you'd have to.
Right. Yeah. So I think Jeremy should do it. I mean, again, I supplied Tony Valentine for 2 hours to the group. He's my department, IT person. But I think, I mean, that's something that we have needed all along, some IT help. And I guess that just wasn't sort of figured into everything. We didn't know we were going to need IT help.
Yeah. Okay, well, if this is under the IGS umbrella, then.
Yeah.
You shared it to.
So tomorrow morning, the morning session?
You know, we have sessions all the time.
Because I know you're going to Sharp tomorrow.
Right, yeah, so it's going to be really busy. So, I mean, the thing is, like, at 4 o'clock today, he's free. Maybe that would be good time.
Jeremy needs like 2 days.
Advance.
Yeah. Or just like 2-day windows.
Yeah.
Let me see
So
if
that's,
Tony's
that's
available.
unavailable. There's something fun. Yeah. But in any case, we'll just take a couple of minutes just to wrap up. Even if you're not done with this, it's not a big deal. I just wanted you to start experiencing just dealing with, creating that kind of mashup as basically a way to communicate with other people and do your activities on social media, because I think that visual, sharing visual stuff is just more and more important. So becoming digitally literate means that you need to be able to deal with images as well. So we can take some time at the end of the session to just look at whatever you've been able to create and whatever you've been able to share, and just just critique really loosely to see if we're actually hitting on some of the 6 points that Ethan and you're actually talking about.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you possibly visual activity into offline
Okay.
Well, if you do a lot of offline stuff, if you do a lot of like face-to-face meetings, that kind of stuff.
Did you guys get to
There's a
look at the
chance that
sign-up sheet?
having a digital presence is going to help. For instance, you might want to create a calendar, like a Google calendar of when you're going to meet, so that people who have access to the internet can actually know when everything is happening, where it's happening, and create invitations online. Create notes that you can share online, traces from the meeting, so that people have actually access to an archive of what happened, and that kind of stuff. So I think that you can still keep traces of what has been done, and you can organize your activities around it. Yeah, that's more of a collaboration. You can create like a private community on Facebook or create Google Plus community and make it private and just share it with the people that you want to interact with.
I've seen some people do that. But the main thing is like policy.
Your target is create something that targets important. So the community is actually people who are organized in groups that have a common goal, and you create those materials that can help people to actually decentralize, create some kind of federation.
See, now this is how you go.
One level up. Yes. Okay. So, since, I think that this is kind of an engaging activity, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just finish whatever I had on my slides, and then we can just spend some time with those images. Okay, so can I just get your attention back for just a couple of minutes? So a word of caution regarding the use of technologies, because there's definitely a dark side to the internet, and I just want to just make sure that I touch a couple of these things. So Slacktivism. That's a term that we hear a lot here in the U.S., which is basically not really activism. It's just somebody who's going to like something, but they don't really care about it. They care enough to give a like, but they don't give it. They don't care enough to give something else. So basically, the idea is that a lot of people don't really believe in Slacktivism. They don't really believe that it actually does anything. Other people say, well, that's the way that people interact with social media, and they just like, and they're not going to be the ones who are going to show up on Saturday to actually do the work, but they're still spreading the news in some way. But it's, so even if you get a lot of likes and you get a lot of people just sharing your stuff, it doesn't mean that it's actually going to lead to any action. Once in a while, you might find 1 in a million person who's actually going to be interested and make an impact, and that might be the only reason to do it. But just let you know that even if you do get large numbers, it doesn't mean that it's going to translate into action. And especially us at home, as Americans, we shield ourselves from problems we have here, like homelessness. Is something that's kind of present in our everyday life, but we live with it and we don't get disturbed by it in some way. So it's kind of hard to get people to actually take action.
Another thing is, so social media actually costs lives. So, for instance, this person was wrongly identified as one of the Boston bombers, and he actually committed suicide. So, because it started on Reddit, people were starting to say, "It's this guy, it's this guy, it's this guy," and he basically got harassed, and he got just mentally ill and just committed suicide. So you might think that technology is all good and stuff, and it can do a lot of good, but it can do a lot of bad too. Some of the things that we're also talking about is cyberbullying. In school, we hear a lot about that. A lot of kids just, instead of bullying themselves, each other just physically, they just send messages on social media and nasty messages, and they it's kind of the same impact. Another one is cyber surveillance. So we heard a lot about PRISM here in the U.S., which is the NSA surveillance program. But also this quote is from Syria, where Facebook is basically a great database for the government to identify people who don't like the regime. So when you actually use social media, you're exposing yourself with a certain ideology, and you're exposing yourself as potentially to political enemies. So it's it's a downside for sure, just something to be conscious about, that as you're developing your online footprint, if you're involved in something that's politically charged, then there are chances that some people will use that against you. So, actually, in conclusion, there is hope, and I think that, and you guys are, a good example of the fact that there is hope. You're coming here. You all have super good projects that that you have in your own countries. The kind of projects that it makes our little problems here as Americans like, oh, maybe they should build a Starbucks closer to my house. A little trivial in comparison with what you guys actually have to face in your own countries. So, and you guys are coming here, and you do have a voice, and you want to use it for people who are disenfranchised, and you want to use social media, you want to use technology for social good. So my last quote is basically, it takes effort to find your voice, it takes courage to use it. You got to be able to find it first, brand yourself, find your passion, find what you want to care about, and then you got to if you want to stand for the little guy, it's not something that's easy, and I really applaud your efforts for everything that you guys do. I think that it's kind of humbling to come here and talk to you guys. I know that you're involved with so many good actions in your own country. So that's pretty much the essence of the presentation itself. So we can continue having conversations, just having taking questions. But I'm pretty much done for here.
So they'd probably like to talk about their experiences at home and with the organizations they work with, and maybe seek some advice from you, or
any questions you guys have. Any questions you guys have? I'm here to answer. Yep.
I think for me, the internet definitely has been, especially with governments. Don't want free speech, don't want access to information. We've been able to say things that even the media shut down. But we also notice that there's a digital divide in rural and the urban area. The people that we access are the same people that have access to smartphones, people that have access to Twitter. They're the same people that always have access to newspapers. I'm trying to think of ways that rural people could have access to such technologies without much public electricity,
Yeah. Well, anyone has similar stories in their countries, and have you seen different ways that technology has gotten in the hands of people who didn't have the means or who have access to electricity and that kind of stuff? Anyone has stories related to that?
Yeah.
Yep.
There's only trying to bring them that we help them to produce electricity in
Okay.
lower places. And we have this project called conductor per child, so they can use such a source of electricity. They're small laptops and designed in a way that they don't really consume as much electricity as the normal computers. It's still independent, but not able to do it.
Yeah, one laptop per child. If you don't know about that initiative, so those are basically cheap laptops that have been not cheap as in cheap, not powerful, but cheap as in they're affordable. And for a while, I don't know if that's still the case, but for a while, for every one of these that they sold in the developed world, they would give one to an African country or to another country. So, and these machines actually have, I think that there's a crank on the side. So if they run out of battery, you can just crank them, and they're going to recharge. So in certain cases, in certain areas, that's the only source of light at night in the house, except like candles or whatever. So this is kind of neat, and they also have like Wi-Fi and that kind of stuff that's built in. I'm not sure in terms of connectivity. Do you know? I'm sorry. Do you know if, in terms of connectivity, how do they work? How do they connect to the internet? Are they just using the regular cell towers and stuff like that? Or?
Well, I'm not really sure, but those sites that tend to connect together. And as of now, the only place I went to where they were using the one that
Okay. So they built a Wi-Fi system in the village or something so that everybody could have access to it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, it's just in pockets of population.
Sometimes they give you like donors to use, which can use
Subdividers.
Yeah, they can use this several companies. Single public sector use this to display.
Yeah. So there's a couple of solutions. It's always a matter of getting some kind of connectivity in the area and getting some kind of power and using whatever resources. One thing that's nice is that you do have access to solar power, solar panel now. It's a lot cheaper to produce electricity using solar. And we're big in wind now. So we have actually UD has a big windmill. What's it called again? The thing in Lewis?
I didn't know I had a special name.
No, it's just a windmill. But so producing electricity instead of having to only use the traditional sources like and even like fossil fuel or whatever. Nowadays, you can definitely create clean electricity from cheaper devices, and it's getting cheaper every day. So that's definitely something to consider.
Lucy, I know also like World Reader, they're providing books, free books on mobile phones. And I know for sure that they're working in Zimbabwe. Essentially, they get publishers to get e-versions of their books that can be used on mobile phones for a range of ages. And it's actually giving access to so many populations in different African countries to be able to access all a range of different types of books, educational stories, or whatever.
That's cool. There's another project that's called Project Gutenberg. That's actually it was related to Google's book scanning project. I can bring it up. I think it's just. And Project Gutenberg is a site for free ebooks. Everything that's in a public domain, you can get free ebooks online from Project Gutenberg. So if you need stories, there's just a lot of stuff there.
But then you need access to a computer and
Yeah, well, you can probably download them and then put them on devices that you distribute to people. It's kind of, it's the syncing process might be a little clunky, but it's definitely,
Would you mind if you have also like some other websites that all the people might be interested in?